In the wake of the Doolittle raid, the Imperial Japanese Navy faced an unexpected humiliation. For the first time, the Americans had struck the Japanese homeland directly. Though the material damage was limited, the psychological blow was immense. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Japan's naval strategy, recognized the threat. To restore Japanese dominance in the Pacific and lure the U.S. carriers into a decisive battle, he devised an ambitious plan to attack the small but strategically vital Midway Atoll and annihilate the American carrier forces. Midway, a cluster of coral islands in the Central Pacific, was small in size but enormous in strategic significance. Controlling Midway meant dominating the northern Pacific, threatening Hawaii, and providing a forward base for operations across the ocean. Yamamoto believed that by seizing Midway and drawing the U.S. carriers into a trap, he could cripple American naval power and secure Japan's expansion. It was a high-stakes gamble, relying on surprise, precision, and overwhelming force. However, the Americans had an advantage Japan did not anticipate: intelligence. The brilliant cryptanalysts at Station Hypo, led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, had broken the Japanese Navy's JN-25B code. They knew not only that Japan planned to attack Midway but also the timing and the composition of the Japanese fleet. This knowledge allowed Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, to prepare a counter-ambush with a bold strategy: hide his carriers beyond the horizon, wait for the Japanese to strike, and then respond decisively. By early June 1942, the stage was set. The Japanese strike force, a formidable assembly of 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Sarayu, and Hiryu, along with battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, sailed toward Midway under Yamamoto's command. Accompanying them were support ships, troop transports, and reconnaissance planes. Their mission was to bombard Midway, draw the American carriers into battle, and crush the enemy fleet. Yamamoto's confidence was immense. He believed his carriers and battle-hardened crews could outmatch any American resistance. On June 3, American forces spotted Japanese reconnaissance planes near Midway. Nimitz had positioned 3 carriers, USS Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, northeast of the island, hidden beyond Japanese reconnaissance range. Pilots trained for hours, readying their aircraft for the attacks that would come. Dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighter squadrons were prepared for the engagement, each crew aware that the coming days could determine the fate of the Pacific. The tension aboard the American carriers was palpable. The men knew the odds were against them, but confidence in intelligence, planning, and each other gave them courage. On June 4, Japanese bombers began their attack on Midway. The small atoll's defenses, manned by U.S. Marines, mounted a tenacious resistance. Anti-aircraft guns roared, and Marine fighter planes scrambled to intercept the incoming waves. Despite suffering damage and losses, the Americans delayed the Japanese long enough for the carrier strike groups to maneuver into position. Every minute counted. Every decision carried the weight of life and death for thousands of men and the strategic future of the Pacific War. American pilots launched waves of bombers to attack the Japanese carriers. Torpedo squadrons approached at low altitude, flying straight into flak and fighter fire. Many were shot down, their crews sacrificing themselves in heroic attempts to weaken the enemy. Meanwhile, dive bombers, arriving later and from higher altitudes, exploited the distraction. Bombs struck with precision, setting the decks of Akagi, Kaga, and Sarayu ablaze. Fires and explosions consumed the carriers, transforming these symbols of Japanese naval power into floating infernos. The audacity and coordination of the American airmen turned the tide of battle in mere hours. Amid the chaos, the Japanese carrier Hiryu remained operational, launching counterattacks that severely damaged the USS Yorktown. Damage control parties aboard Yorktown worked tirelessly, extinguishing fires and stabilizing the ship. Yet the relentless American dive bombers returned, hitting Hiryu multiple times and ultimately sinking the last Japanese carrier. In a single day, the Japanese fleet lost 4 of its most important carriers, while the Americans lost only 1 carrier and a few aircraft, a staggering reversal of expectations. The human dimension of the battle was profound. Pilots, sailors, and Marines faced extraordinary danger, often with little hope of survival. Stories emerged of heroism and sacrifice: torpedo bomber crews pressing forward against overwhelming odds, dive bomber pilots navigating flak and fighters with unflinching courage, and sailors risking their lives to save comrades from burning ships. The intensity of the combat forged bonds of trust and solidarity, leaving lasting impressions on all who survived. Beyond the tactical victory, Midway had immense strategic consequences. Japan's loss of 4 carriers and experienced aircrews irreversibly weakened its offensive capability. The Americans, buoyed by the unexpected triumph, gained confidence and momentum. Midway shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, marking the first major defeat for Japan and signaling that the Allies could challenge Japanese expansion successfully. As the battle concluded, both sides assessed the cost. Thousands of men had been killed or wounded. Ships, planes, and material were lost, but the scale of Japan's losses dwarfed those of the Americans. The bravery, ingenuity, and resilience displayed by U.S. forces became emblematic of the broader struggle across the Pacific, demonstrating that intelligence, coordination, and determination could overcome numerical superiority. The Battle of Midway remains a defining moment in World War II history. It highlights the importance of preparation, courage under fire, and the unpredictability of warfare. The combination of code-breaking, strategic foresight, and sheer heroism turned a near-impossible situation into a decisive victory. For the men who fought, the survivors and the fallen alike, Midway became a testament to the extraordinary capacity of humans to confront danger, adapt, and prevail. In the aftermath of the initial carrier strikes, American forces faced the challenge of consolidating their victory while remaining alert to Japanese counterattacks. Smoke and flames rose from the burning carriers, illuminating the chaos below. Pilots returning from missions navigated through debris and enemy aircraft, landing on the remaining carriers with nerves stretched to the limit. Every landing was perilous, decks were damaged, crews exhausted, and the risk of collision or mishap constant. Yet the Americans maintained cohesion, a testament to training, discipline, and determination under fire. Meanwhile, Japanese forces regrouped, attempting to salvage what remained of their striking power. Admiral Yamamoto's plan had unraveled in hours. The loss of carriers and experienced aviators could not be easily replaced. The strategic initiative had shifted decisively to the Americans, who now controlled the central Pacific skies and seas. Yamamoto ordered a retreat, realizing that further engagement risked complete destruction of his remaining fleet. This marked the first time in the Pacific War that Japan had been forced to withdraw after a major naval engagement, a profound psychological blow. The courage of individual airmen defined the narrative of Midway. Torpedo Squadron 8, VT State of the USS Hornet, flying obsolete TBD Devastators, pressed their attacks despite knowing their slow aircraft would be easy prey for Japanese fighters. Almost every member of the squadron was shot down, yet their sacrifice drew enemy attention and created the opening for subsequent dive bomber attacks that would sink the carriers. Lieutenant Commander John C. Waldron, leading VT State, exemplified this heroism, and his actions became legendary, immortalized in accounts of valor and duty. Dive bomber pilots, arriving from altitude after the torpedo attacks, exploited the exposed decks. Lieutenant Richard Best of the USS Enterprise executed precision strikes, scoring hits on the Kaga and Akagi that triggered catastrophic explosions. The coordination between different squadrons, the timing, and the audacity of these maneuvers reflected exceptional tactical skill. The destruction of the Japanese carriers was not only a matter of firepower but of timing, courage, and the ability to exploit fleeting opportunities in the chaos of battles. The sea itself became a battlefield. Explosions tossed water and debris into the air, while survivors clung to rafts, wreckage, or life vests amid the debris. Sailors faced exposure, hypothermia, and the constant danger of enemy attack. Rescue efforts were heroic and perilous, as remaining American ships navigated through burning oil and scattered wreckage to save men from the water. The human cost of Midway was severe, yet the resilience of those involved underscored the extraordinary determination and solidarity that defined the U.S. Navy's response. As the sun set on June 4, the American carriers remained operational, though battle-worn. USS Yorktown, despite significant damage, was patched sufficiently to continue operations. Enterprise and Hornet retained full combat readiness. Japanese forces, meanwhile, had lost for carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and experienced personnel, losses from which they would never fully recover. The disproportionate impact of the battle demonstrated the effectiveness of strategy, intelligence, and decisive action, even when facing a numerically superior foe. The subsequent days involved both pursuit and consolidation. American forces tracked the remnants of the Japanese fleet, seeking to inflict additional damage while avoiding unnecessary exposure. Reports from reconnaissance planes guided cautious movements, ensuring that the U.S. could capitalize on its advantage without overextending. The careful balance of aggression and prudence reflected Admiral Nimitz' command philosophy: strike decisively but maintain operational security. Human stories continued to emerge from the wreckage. Pilots recounted the terror of low-level attacks, the roar of engines, and the flash of anti-aircraft fire. Sailors shared tales of rescuing comrades from burning oil slicks. Marines and support crews described sleepless nights repairing damaged equipment and tending to wounded personnel. These narratives gave life to the battle beyond strategy and statistics, emphasizing the courage, ingenuity, and resilience of ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. Midway's outcome reshaped the Pacific War. Japan's expansionist ambitions were stalled, American carriers gained dominance, allowing subsequent operations in the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, and beyond. Morale soared among U.S. forces and the public, while Japan faced a crisis of confidence and capability. Strategically, Midway shifted the initiative to the Allies, providing a platform for offensive operations that would gradually erode Japanese control over the Pacific. The human dimension remained central to the story. Survivors described moments of fear, improvisation, and triumph. Letters, diaries, and interviews revealed the emotional and psychological toll of the battle, loss of comrades, constant danger, and the relentless pressure of decision-making. Yet these accounts also celebrated ingenuity, teamwork, and the determination to persevere against overwhelming odds. The battle became a crucible, forging heroes and defining the character of the U.S. Navy for the remainder of the war. As historians reflect on Midway, several lessons emerge: the decisive value of intelligence, the importance of flexibility and initiative, and the extraordinary impact of human courage under fire. The battle demonstrated that strategic insight combined with tactical daring could overcome numerical superiority. It highlighted the interplay of chance, skill, and resilience in shaping outcomes, and the profound consequences of seemingly small decisions in the context of global conflict. By the conclusion of Part 1, Midway had already cemented its place in history. The carriers Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu were lost. American losses were significant but sustainable. The battle exemplified the synthesis of strategy, technology, and human courage that defined modern naval warfare. The courage of pilots, sailors, and commanders, acting with skill and daring, ensured a decisive victory that would reverberate through the Pacific War. As the smoke cleared over the Central Pacific, the scope of the Battle of Midway became apparent. For Japanese carriers, symbols of imperial naval power, had been destroyed. Hundreds of aircraft were lost, along with thousands of skilled pilots and crewmen. Yet for the Americans, the costs, while significant, were far less catastrophic. The carriers USS Enterprise, Hornet, and the battered Yorktown remained operational. Their survival ensured that the U.S. Navy could maintain offensive pressure in the Pacific, turning the psychological and strategic tide against Japan. Survivors recounted harrowing experiences. Pilots described the intense anti-aircraft fire, the deafening explosions, and the terror of low-altitude torpedo attacks. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading dive bombers from the Enterprise, had made split-second decisions under pressure, locating the Japanese carriers and directing his squadron with precision. His actions, along with those of countless others, highlighted the extraordinary skill, courage, and composure required in the heat of battle. The Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, became legendary for their valor. Flying slow, outdated TBD devastators, they approached the Japanese fleet head-on, fully aware of the lethal odds. Almost every aircraft was shot down, yet their sacrifice was pivotal. By drawing Japanese fighter attention and diverting anti-aircraft fire, they cleared the path for the dive bombers that ultimately sank the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. This episode exemplified the cost of heroism, bravery paid for in blood, but decisive in outcome. Meanwhile, the Japanese command scrambled to salvage what remained. Admiral Yamamoto faced the reality that the Japanese offensive had failed catastrophically. The loss of carriers and experienced airmen could not be quickly remedied, and the strategic initiative had shifted irrevocably. In desperation, Hiryu launched counterattacks, inflicting serious damage on USS Yorktown. Damage control parties aboard the carrier worked tirelessly to save her from sinking, extinguishing fires, repairing systems, and treating the wounded. Their resilience under pressure reflected the extraordinary dedication of American sailors, whose efforts would allow Yorktown to return to action, albeit temporarily. The sea itself became a crucible of survival. Sailors clung to rafts and floating wreckage, exposed to oil slick fires and the threat of enemy planes. Rescue efforts were fraught with peril, yet American destroyers and cruisers maneuvered skillfully to recover men, exemplifying courage and tenacity in conditions that were both chaotic and deadly. Stories of comrades pulling each other from the water, treating burns, and improvising medical care underscored the human cost of naval warfare and the bonds forged under extreme duress. Air power proved decisive. Dive bombers, striking with precision from high altitudes, exploited Japanese tactical errors. Japanese carriers were caught with decks cluttered with fueled and armed planes, amplifying the destructive power of each bomb. The resulting fires and explosions were catastrophic. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were engulfed in flames, leaving Hiryu as the only operational Japanese carrier. Yet even she fell to relentless American strikes hours later. By nightfall, the tide had definitively turned, and the Japanese offensive was effectively neutralized. For the Japanese pilots and crew, the battle was a sobering reckoning. Their confidence, cultivated through victories in previous campaigns across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, had been shattered. The loss of veteran aviators, trained over years in complex naval operations, was particularly devastating. Unlike aircraft or ships, human experience could not be replaced quickly. Japan's strategic options were now constrained, forcing a more defensive posture in subsequent months and shaping the course of the Pacific War. Back in the United States, news of the victory at Midway was electrifying. For a nation still recovering from Pearl Harbor, the triumph provided a surge of confidence and hope. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and personal correspondence celebrated the heroism of American aviators, sailors, and Marines. The narrative emphasized courage, precision, and sacrifice, cementing Midway as a defining moment in the American collective consciousness during World War II. Midway's consequences extended far beyond immediate tactical outcomes. Strategically, the battle ended Japanese expansion in the Pacific and shifted initiative to the Allies. The loss of carriers delayed further offensive operations, allowing the United States to regroup and plan counteroffensives, including campaigns in the Solomon Islands and Guadalcanal. Psychologically, the battle demonstrated that Japan was not invincible, inspiring Allied forces and reinforcing the value of intelligence, planning, and decisive action. Human stories continued to emerge. Pilots who had survived crash landings, sailors rescued from burning oil slicks, and Marines who had defended Midway under relentless bombardment shared their accounts. Letters, diaries, and interviews revealed the fear, improvisation, and courage that defined the battle. These narratives gave depth to historical analysis, emphasizing that beyond strategy and tactics, the battle was shaped by human resilience, ingenuity, and bravery. The leadership of Admiral Nimitz proved pivotal. Balancing risk and opportunity, he positioned his carriers beyond Japanese detection, relied on intelligence to anticipate enemy movements, and empowered subordinate commanders to act decisively. His strategic foresight turned a potential ambush into a decisive victory, exemplifying the critical role of leadership in complex wartime operations. Meanwhile, Japanese command faced harsh consequences. Admiral Yamamoto's plan, relying on overwhelming force and surprise, had failed. The loss of carriers and aviators severely curtailed Japan's operational capabilities. Morale within the Japanese fleet was shaken, and the psychological impact of Midway forced a more cautious approach in future engagements. The battle underscored the dangers of underestimating an enemy, overextending resources, and relying solely on numerical or material superiority. As the weeks passed, the survivors of Midway were celebrated, recognized, and memorialized. Awards and commendations honored extraordinary acts of bravery. Pilots who had executed daring attacks, sailors who had fought fires and saved lives, and Marines who had defended the atoll all became symbols of American determination. Their actions inspired future operations and provided a template for courage and innovation under extreme pressure. The Battle of Midway stands as a turning point in World War II. It demonstrated the decisive impact of intelligence, the value of training and preparation, and the extraordinary courage of individuals in the face of overwhelming odds. By shifting initiative to the Allies, weakening Japanese offensive capability, and inspiring confidence among American forces, Midway reshaped the trajectory of the Pacific War.